The Isle of Wight, a picturesque island full of rolling landscapes, spectacular coastlines and quaint thatched cottages. What better place for a holiday, offering as it does excellent walks, cycling, water sports and lots of family fun. It has an atmosphere all of its own, and the pace of life here almost makes you feel that you've stepped back into the island's rich history. And that history has certainly left its mark, because while the island will undoubtedly charm you by day, it can sometimes be a very different story at night. You see, ghosts seem to abound here. Tales of haunted hospitals, spooky manor houses, and spectral travellers on the roads are commonplace in this idyllic setting. Why don't you join us as we go in search of some ghosts of the Isle of Wight. The island has many attractive beaches which are understandably popular during the daytime with tourists and locals alike. But if you should come to Atherfield Beach by night, you'll find there are very few people around. Yet you might still find you have company of a rather different kind. And that's why many local fishermen stay away from this area after dark. Our reporter, Andrew Ure, went to meet some of them.
Many of the remote beaches around the southwestern coastline of the island are accessible only via slippery and precarious paths which descend the steep, muddy cliffs. As a result, they're rarely crowded, but are favoured instead by anglers seeking a quiet night's fishing. Yet, few of them will now venture onto the beaches alone at night because in the past their peaceful vigils have been interrupted by some very unexpected events. About 12 years ago, Chris Cade came here night fishing and found that he had more company than he bargained for.
I was down here one evening fishing, and I was fishing in what they call Chow Bay with my friend who's a regular fisherman down here, and I left him on the bay up in the middle there, and I walked along to where I am now, and I was sat there and I was just casting my rod in and out, reeling, and I put my rod down. It was a nice still night, right, and it was just like it is now, and I was catching these pouts, so, you know, my mind sort of running away with me because I was busy all the time. And I was sat here like this, watching it one time, and I could look at it, it was like in the shingles, because it was all shingle, you know, like just pebbles at the time. I chucked me stones up the beach, and I was shining my torch everywhere up and down the cliff, you know, thinking it might have been a fox or an animal, because some nights you see the old foxes down there, and the old noise was still there like that, and, you know, not as if it was... My imagination was running wild with me because I never had nothing to do. I was active all the time where I was getting me bites on my rod and reel me little fishing. Yeah. So what I more or less, you know, give it 5 minutes and I sort of legged it up the beach to my mate who was back up there. And I sort of don't come down on my own now, you know, I want to make sure there's someone with me.
Bill Bradley remembers that night and some of the other encounters that have occurred on the island's beaches.
I didn't actually see Chris at the time he had his experience, Chris Cade. But I did see him when he got back to the weighing in station for the fishing competition at Coppins Bridge. And Chris then was still as white as a sheet and he was shivering. Now Chris is someone who was quite used to fishing on his own all the time, on every beach that I can ever think of. He fished at Luckham. Now Luckham's supposed to be a haunted beach, and he fished various other beaches. But seeing Chris that night, there's no way that I could ever see Chris going back and fishing on his own again. Another time, there was a gentleman called Vic Hill. He was fishing just to the right, left of the steps at Whale Chine. He was fishing on his own, and he heard something coming along the beach. It came along the beach towards him, dressed in black. He said hello, no answer at all. And as it came along, as it went past him, he said to me that he smelt a smell, and he put it down to the smell of death, and it then disappeared just into the dark. Another gentleman, Roger Lawrence, he was fishing at Black Gang. He was at the time fishing with my brother and a few other friends. He was fishing just around the corner in Black Gang Bay from Chale, fishing on his own. Now Roger Lawrence is a chap who actually lived inside Carriagebrook Castle, so he had no fear of anything, didn't believe in anything supernatural or anything. And he heard something shuffling through the sand towards him. He said it sounded like someone or something with waders on, or large boots. Every time he looked up or went towards it and had a look, tried to have a look, see what it was, the sound stopped. In the end, Roger couldn't stand it anymore. He just took off, left his fishing gear again on the beach, and ran towards where my brother and the others were fishing, and no way would they go back down there again.
Another dedicated fisherman of the haunted beaches was Dick Hall. He recalls some of the strange things which have occurred near to Whale Chine.
Yes, well, it happened just about where I'm pointing there, and Unusually, I was on this beach entirely alone. As I stood there, I felt somebody come along the beach towards me. And this being, or whatever it was, actually came and stood by my shoulder here. And I looked and still did not see anything. And I said, "Excuse me," I said, "but I don't know who you are or why you're here." I said, "but I'm not here to do you any harm, and I hope you're not here to do me any." Suddenly I felt this being, or whatever it was, leave my shoulder and move off down the beach, back this way, towards the steps, and I was a bit relieved, but honestly and truthfully, I've never had an experience quite like that. But if people say to me, "You were dreaming," I can assure them I was not. Other friends have had similar experiences on this beach. Roger Lawrence had an experience up to my right here. Christopher Cade had one up by the boats, which is right along the beach towards Atherfield Point. Neville Wheeler, Vic Hills, and other people that I know have had strange callings or experiences on this beach. And I could name one or two more, but I mean, it's true. That's just how it is.
Peter Shortman is one of the few fishermen to have actually seen something on the haunted beaches.
He was dressed in like a dark duffel coat, black I would say, or a mountain blue, which with the collar was pulled up. He had an old sailor's hat on, and I believe he had a beard. His eyes, looked straight at me, and I just spoke to him, I said, "All right," or something similar words as that, And instead of answering, he just walked straight by, and I thought, "That's invisible, old sod," And he disappeared behind me, and then I come to think, I thought to myself, well, he didn't come past me, and the only way he could have come is from behind this point, and the point goes out to sea. From the cliffs it's about 15 foot high, and then it tapers off into the sea. Well, at high water there'd been at least 6 foot of water there. Now that was the only way that man could have come to me, is round that point. He couldn't have climbed it, and it was too steep. It was just like mud. And I thought, well, he wasn't wet. And I flashed a torch about and I couldn't see anyone. But I could still hear these footsteps. Then I thought to myself, oh, you're seeing things, sort of business. So then I sat back and went fishing again. And yeah, the tide turned, and only fish the incoming tide in that point, And so I packed up and started coming home. And then all the way back through, I was walking on pebbles. Pebbles about sizes, I suppose, 1.5 inches, I suppose, at that time, because the beach changes with the weather. And I could hear somebody walking behind me all the time. And every time I stopped, they stopped. But not straight away. It wasn't like an echo. No, they'd stop. And so after a while, I got so fed up, I sort of turned the torch on it, and quick, but no one was there. But you could actually hear somebody walking in the pebbles. And that carried on right the way down. I suppose I must have walked, I'm not sure, half a mile or more, until I got to the main beach under the Atherfield camp in Shepherd's Chine, where all the rest of the anglers were. And this one chap that I come across first of all, he said to me, he said, "You deserve a medal," he said. Well, he didn't say exactly that, but that's what he meant. He said, "Fishing up there on your own," he says, "all night, And he said to me, he said, "You seen something, didn't you?" And I said, "Nah, I didn't see nothing, because I didn't want to be made look a fool, And "Yes, you did," he said. And then he sort of questioned me, he said, "Otherwise you wouldn't have flashed your light beam like you did 2 or 3 times there." I said, "Nah," I said, "It's okay," and I walked off and come on home.
The island's many old manor houses are well populated with ghostly occupants. Arreton Manor's history dates back some 1,200 years, and it has been previously owned by no less than 8 British monarchs. Here, a brutal family murder resulted in one such haunting. A young Elizabethan girl, Annabel Lee, witnessed her brother John smothering their father, Barnaby, with a pillow as he lay ill in bed. John, determined to let nothing stand in the way of his inheritance, dragged the screaming Annabel into an upstairs room and pushed her through a window to her death. Mrs. Ivy Wellstead, once the Manor's receptionist, recalls meeting Annabel on more than one occasion.
I was sit in my usual place in the hall of the Manor waiting for visitors to come in, and I caught a little glimpse of blue. I looked, thinking that one of the visitors had come downstairs, but there was no one there. And presently this little piece of blue grew into a blue dress of a little girl with fair hair, sort of curls, and she had this blue dress on right down, almost down to the floor, and little white shoes on. And she just stood there. And I didn't know whether to get up and run or stay where I was, to be quite truthful, but I stayed where I was, and she gave me 1 or 2 smiles. Then some visitors came in, and she disappeared. By the time I looked again, she was gone. But I did see her in the years that I was working at the Manor. I suppose I saw her about 4 or 5 times.
A young servant girl hanged herself from these rafters at Hazley Manor in 1841. Ray Young, the present owner of Hazley, explains.
Amelia was 19 years old, working in the house, and she said a rather strange thing to the other servants in the house. "This is my last day's work at Hazley," which is a strange thing to say because she was going nowhere. But later on in the day, one of the other serving girls found her hanging from a beam upstairs in the house in what was termed a drying room. The servants were terrified and called the master of the house, who cut her down, but it was too late, she was dead. And the brief newspaper report recounted the fact that the master's son, the young son of the house, married somebody else 2 days later. Amelia was buried out in the St. George's churchyard here at Oughton, outside consecrated ground, because it was a very bad thing to do, to hang yourself in those days. And we surmise that she was got into trouble with the owner's son, was probably pregnant, and ended her own life tragically. And Amelia's been reported to have been seen flitting through the rooms upstairs. A gentleman came here one summer and said, "Do you remember me? I came here a year ago." Of course I hadn't, because we had lots of visitors. But he said, "You might have remembered me because I came after you'd closed. I had left my coat in the toilets." And I said, "Well, I do remember an incident, yes." And he said, "Well, that was me, and my family had been urging me to come back to you and tell you for the last year what I saw." And I said, "Well, what did you see?" And he said, "I was walking down there, and a figure appeared across the little yard where the toilets are, only above the knee level, apparently on the ground, and he had open-necked shirt, white with large collars pushed back, 1 single button on the chest showing a hairy chest, a very large brimmed hat, black hat with a feather in it, knickerbocker trousers tied below the knee where his legs disappeared into the ground, and his mouth was open and laughing, a silent laughter, and showed gold and black teeth, blackened teeth, and he appeared to be laughing at this gentleman. And he's left a drawing of this figure that he saw. He's no artist, but he left me a drawing of what he saw of this figure. And that was the most vivid explanation, but he's been seen by a lady who had the same description, except this time he had a sword strapped to his waist in a different part of the house. We believe he's from the medieval late Tudor period, through that period, by his dress, probably Tudor, and could well be Sir Edward Horsey, who died in the house here.
The Longstone at Motterston has long been associated with witchcraft and occult power. The Romans almost certainly carried out blood sacrifices here, and the Celts and Saxons also met around this ancient moat stone, from which the village derives its name. The stone is even nowadays reputed to be a regular meeting place for modern-day witches And from time to time there are reports of strange and frightening experiences here. Judy Axford came here for a walk one hot and sunny afternoon in 1981. It was a day she will not easily forget.
It was a boiling hot, real hot summer's day, and me and a friend of mine and his son and my son Darren, who was 7 at the time, pulled up outside the church at Nettlestone there and went for a nice walk, as we thought, up through the trees. And me and my friend got up near the stones, and it started to get really cold, and I mean cold. It was just like a freezer, you know, and the goosebumps just stood up. Then I started to get a smell of decomposed body, and that was really overpowering. It made me feel sick. The boys were quite a way back playing still, so I turned around and I said, I'm going, and started to run. And Darren, who was facing me, done the sign of the cross over his body. I mean, a 7-year-old doesn't know to do a cross over their body, do they? And we just kept running and running on the way, running back down through. There was a lot of injured birds. I say a lot, but there's 4 or 5 birds that were injured and lying around and fluttering the wings and that. And I'm not talking about baby birds. I'm talking about, you know, the full-grown birds were struggling, and it's horrible. And like I say, we just went out to go for a lovely walk, which did turn into a nightmare, really.
After an experience like that, you could be forgiven for wanting to sample a bit more than just the hospitality on offer in any one of the many fine old inns to be found on the island. A stiff drink and some good company would certainly bolster your spirits. But you'd need to choose your inn with some care, remembering that many of them have a history which goes back a long way. Newport's Castle Inn is one such establishment. Landlord Eddie Duff is well acquainted with the pub's history and is in no doubt that he shares the building with some unseen occupants.
This is about the oldest coaching house on the island. It's the 2nd oldest building on the island. The only other building like this was Buddle Inn. That's a coaching house as well. The place is haunted. I've actually seen movements of the ghosts in the main bar. I was sat at the bar one night down there, and I heard something and turned around quickly, and the brasses on the stanchion there and the clock had moved. They were moving, and I got up to go over to them because they're solid, and you couldn't move, but the clock had jumped down 1 notch on an nail. I put it back in its right place. Went to sit back over there again, heard this noise again. I thought, there's nobody in the bar, there's nobody upstairs. Come over, and that door over there, which leads to the hideaway stair, the door was actually open. Now there's a pin in there which holds the lock down. Never done that before. No. Out here, you can feel the ghost presence late at night, especially when I come in locking up into the stable bar, which is behind me. And you hear this very, very faint whistling noise. And he always tells us about my dog. He gets up there and his hair stands on end, and he growls all the time. So it's not imagination, I can assure you.
12 years ago, somewhere near Calbourne, an even stranger pub was visited by a very rational island resident who we'll call Tony, to protect his identity. Andrew Yore investigates.
One cold November night, Tony called on a friend at Newtown and the two set off for a drink. As they drove towards Shalfleet, they came across a turning on the left which they did not recall seeing before. This struck them as rather odd, since both men were familiar with the locality, so, out of curiosity, they decided to find out where it led. After driving along the lane for some distance, they came upon an old pub called the Falcon, or possibly the Vulcan. The lounge bar was full of heavy brown leather furniture and was deserted, and so the two men made for the public bar instead. Despite the presence of about 15 other people in this bar, there was a cheerless and unfriendly atmosphere. Since the men had entered the bar, everyone had stopped talking and begun to stare intently at them. The men were unnerved by such close scrutiny as they were ordering their drinks. The drinks they ordered, they were told by the barmaid, were unavailable, so they accepted the nearest, which tasted horrible. The drinks were paid for with a £1 note, and change was given in florins and shillings, not in itself unusual, as both coins doubled as decimal coinage. The men sat down at one of the wooden tables. The conversations had resumed around the bar, but the two men still felt very unwelcome due to the constant glances they were receiving. The coldness of the place and the hostile atmosphere persuaded the two men to drink up and leave, which they did with considerable relief. On the way out, the pub sign was still swinging and creaking over the deserted car park as they drove away. Only a short distance further along the road, they were amazed to find themselves at the Sun Inn at Kelbourne. As the men were later to realise, that just was not possible, because they had not crossed the main Newport to Yarmouth road. After one drink at the Sun Inn, the men went home, puzzled. Subsequent detailed inquiries, both locally and indeed at the County Records Office, have failed to turn up the slightest evidence that the unwelcoming pub ever existed. And despite a great deal of diligent searching, Tony has never again found the strange little lane off the road from Newtown to Shalfleet.
So this is Watchbell Lane. Yes, the Black Lady.
On most Wednesday evenings throughout the year, you can join appropriately costumed guides for the Newport Ghost Walk, an atmospheric stroll which takes in many of the town's haunted places. Tours assemble outside the Wheatsheaf pub in St Thomas's Square at 7:45 p.m, and further information is usually available from the tourist board. Advance booking is recommended due to high demand, and who knows, you might even meet the Black Lady of Watchbell Lane.
Northwood Park in Cowes has been the setting for many strange occurrences. Northwood House has a varied history. It was occupied by a community of Benedictine nuns from 1902 to 1906 and was used as a Red Cross hospital in both World Wars. Nearby there was a private school where in 1918 a number of children died in a virulent outbreak of influenza. Perhaps these factors may have some bearing on the current nighttime population of Northwood Park. Jean and Brian Lewis were walking home from their daughter's house one night when they experienced just such an encounter. I asked Jean to explain what actually happened.
I was walking up here with my Alsatian dog when all of a sudden a hare just stood up on end, and I looked towards these bushes and I could see something white hovering in and out, and I wondered, oh, what is it? Is it a peeping Tom? As we came round the corner where I saw this thing hovering, we heard this terrible noise of children playing, screaming. It was deafening, absolutely deafening. And I walked past this tree here. I walked past the tree and there's these two children playing on the tree. This tree was going up and down, and you could it was so loud, and the cracking, you could see the cracks in the trees. And yet you look today, there's no cracks in the trees, you know. And I walked past, and then all of a sudden I turned round and I came up to the children and I said, go home. Only your mothers will cry. Now what made me say that, I just don't know. As if something had taken me over. Their faces looked fully formed, but their bodies were small, and I could see the short trousers they were wearing, their grey knees, and their little jackets and little caps they was wearing. They must have been 80 to 90 years ago. All of a sudden Brian said to me, come away. And I walked away and I had a row with Brian. I said, why did you take me away? He said, for once in your lifetime, do as you're told. We had a row all the way down Ward Avenue until we got home. And I said, I'm going to ring the police, Brian. I said, I feel very uneasy about what I saw in the bushes. And Brian put his hand on the phone and he said, for God's sake, leave it alone. Not knowing really what he knew. And it wasn't till my daughter came to pick her dog up, Chad, that I told her what had happened. And she said, sit down, Mother, and go through it all again, because she said, do you think they were real?
And when I thought back afterwards, no, they couldn't have been real in the clothes that they were dressed in.
Customers at Hair Talk, Jean's daughter's hairdressing business in Cowes, have also reported ghostly encounters in Northwood Park, and a local medium confirmed Jean Lewis's description of the ghost children. The park is always floodlit after dark, and yet on the night of Jean and Brian Lewis's encounter, it was dark. Could it be perhaps that they walked backwards in time that night in 1993?
Broadlands House in Newport, for some time the headquarters of the Department of Social Security on the island, has recently had an extensive facelift to equip it for the 90s. But its new appearance belies the fact that it is an old building. A lace factory was running in this building in 1827. During 1982, Lindsay Matthews was working for the DHSS at Broadlands, and her experience goes to show that ghosts can turn up at the most inconvenient times.
Well, I was working in a particular department, and the toilet that was near to my office was engaged, and so I decided to go and use a different loo to the one I normally used to use. And I was sitting on the loo, minding my own business, and I was looking at the floor and I saw a foot appear. And for a split second, or a fraction of a split second, I thought, oh my God, I didn't lock the door properly and somebody's walking in. And in another split second I realised that wasn't the case. And then I thought somebody was just putting their foot under the door as a joke. But of course the door was one that went right down to the floor, so that wasn't the case either. And I was looking at a foot, and it was like a lady's boot with the bottom of the lace petticoat just going over the ankle. And it wasn't in colour, it was sort of grey, black and white, and sort of see-through but sort of not see-through. And it was only there for a few seconds and then disappeared. And I was absolutely terrified. I didn't sort of feel a rush of cold air or anything like that, not like some people do. I just felt really, really frightened. And after I'd tidied myself up, I realised, of course, I had to go back down to my office again, and I really didn't want to open the toilet door at all, because although the foot had disappeared, I felt that as soon as I opened the door, I'd be, you know, right up against this person. And so it was a few minutes before I could make myself actually leave the toilet, because the angle the foot had been at, it was almost as though somebody was the other side of the door and was about to take a step forward. It sounds a bit of a cliche, but somebody actually said to me, "You look like you've seen a ghost," and I said, "I think I might have done," when I was sitting on the toilet. Not the most convenient of places.
Well, I suppose that must prove that ghosts are no respecters of persons. Fort Redoubt, perched on the cliff edge overlooking Freshwater Bay, was the scene of a horrific explosion more than 90 years ago. 4 soldiers died in the tragedy, and at least one of them is still walking the fort, looking, it said, for his dead comrades. 2 other ghostly soldiers have been seen standing on the bridge which crosses the deep ditch which surrounds the fort. In the entrance tunnel, there lurks the ghost of another soldier, crushed to death against the wall by a horse and cart. An eerie green light has sometimes been seen flickering around the courtyard before disappearing into the former guard room, and some local fishermen will not go near the old fort after dark. Margaret and Paddy Longmore bought the fort in 1977 and have operated a thriving tea room here ever since. They are quite sure that their fort is haunted.
In June 1901, the breech block on a 12-pounder gun, which is just above this area, blew out. It killed 3 soldiers and the officer. And one of the soldiers is said to haunt these tunnels here, which are directly beneath the gun, and also lead from these magazines. And sometimes on a quiet night, We can hear a thump in our tea room, which is adjacent to that position, and all the cups will rattle. We think, of course, that it's due to the sea hitting the cliff, but I sometimes wonder if it's just this percussion caused by the breech block blowing out this gun and sadly killing these men. One night, 3 fishermen were standing in the courtyard talking. It was late in the evening, it was dark, and a green light appeared on that far wall. It slowly moved round the wall, around to here, and then disappeared into the old guard room. Now this was the guard room, it's now an up and over garage, but it was a guard room at that time, and the whole guard room filled with this green light and stayed there for a few seconds and then slowly died away. There's no explanation for it, and those 3 fishermen are now very reluctant to come here in the evening.
It was one morning before the tea room opened, and 2 waitresses were getting the cake cabinet ready, and they put all the cakes in the cabinet and they were just looking at them, and one of them said, "Oh, if I was to buy a cake today, I'd have the toffee apple fudge cake." And the other waitress said, "Oh, I'd have the lemon cake." And then all of a sudden there was this sound, and they looked round and there was no one there. A bit spooky, really.
Nettleston Priary, built on the site of an older medieval house, has a strange story attached to it, dating back some 200 years. At one time, an old portrait hung in the Priory's dining room. The image on it was that of a young girl, about 14 years of age, wearing a blue dress edged with silver lace. A canary sat on her wrist, held by a satin ribbon, and a small dog frolicked at her feet. Sadly, the young girl died soon after her portrait was painted. Her little Cavalier King Charles Spaniel now rests peacefully in his glass case on a window ledge at the Priory. In 1927, when the Priory was sold and its contents dispersed, disturbances began to occur. The stuffed dog had been bought by a curio dealer, and the Blue Lady was distraught. Her small form was seen frequently, running through the house, sobbing and calling out for her lost pet. The dog was traced to an antique dealer in Newport and duly returned to the Priory. All has been well since then, and although the Blue Lady has been seen from time to time, she appears quite happy. Since the incident with the dog, successive owners of Nettleston Priary have been careful not to disturb him. One former member of staff foolishly thought to play a trick on his colleagues and move the dog. He simply didn't believe the stories he had heard, until one afternoon he heard the sound of a dog's paws on the carpet. The room turned very cold, and he looked up to see the little spaniel coming across the floor towards him. It passed by without acknowledging his presence and vanished. When you arrive on the island, you'll be greeted by a sign that tells you to drive carefully, because island roads are different. Some even bear names which hint at stories linked to them, but just how different they are can be judged from what you're about to hear. Ted Jones was driving home with several friends one night about 40 years ago, on this road at Nettlestone. As their car rounded this corner and passed the church, they were in for a shock. Ted takes up the story.
We went to a dart match at Bembridge. Big crowd of us. Come back just about 11 o'clock. Turned the corner, and this figure came out of the church and ran right ahead in front of us. Couldn't stop. And bang, that was it. We've hit someone. We got out, had a look. Of course, if you can imagine, we've just come from the pub, we've had a few drinks, so are we seeing things? and we looked all around, couldn't see anything, looked under the car. 5 minutes, we decided to carry on. Got back to the pub and decided that we should tell someone, the police, which an old policeman there, old Harry Coffin, who was a real old-time policeman, we had a word with him. And his words were, "Don't worry about it." We've had this one reported to us several times over the years. So, happily, we all went back to the pub again.
Ted Jones isn't the only one who has had an encounter on the roads of the Isle of Wight. Such reports are surprisingly common. Janet Eldridge was driving across Stapler's Heath between Newport and Wootton when she saw a lonely figure ahead.
I slowed down I think into second gear, and as I did this she stepped off of the verge into the road, quite calmly, slowly. Naturally I came to a stop and I leaned towards the windscreen to look out as she leaned over the bonnet to look into me. And I thought, well, what a peculiar woman. And I thought, well, she wants a lift. And as I thought this, so she came from the front of the car. I assumed she was coming to the driver's side, pushed my window back to speak to her, but she carried on walking and disappeared through the hedge on the opposite side of the road. And I think then I do remember going through red traffic lights. I remember breaking all speed limits. I didn't make it to home. I had to stop and call in to a friend of mine and have a sit down. And when I knocked the door, she opened the door and she said, "Crikey, Janet, you look as if you've seen a ghost." I said, "Can I sit down for a moment?" Whilst I told the story, she said, "Well, what did she look like?" And it was only then I realised that this poor woman didn't have a face. It was just a grey blur.
Michael Morey was a woodcutter. As if it wasn't bad enough that he had to exist on a pittance from his wealthy masters, Morey's grandson had recently come into money and Morey was burning with resentment. One day the boy was late in preparing Morey's meal, and this one incident finally sparked off a burning rage in him. The older man hacked his grandson to death with his axe. Although he made a desperate attempt to cover his deed, his guilty secret somehow came to light. Michael Morey was tried and hanged at Winchester. His body was returned to Arreton and left to hang in chains on the gibbet at Down End, close to where the Hare and Hounds public house now stands, until local villagers had to petition for its removal. Morey would then have been buried in an unmarked grave close to the crossroads, as was the custom with suicides and murderers. Michael Morey is still seen from time to time. Late on a September night in 1974, a resident of London stalled her car at the crossroads just half a mile south of Gallows Hill. There was sufficient moonlight for her to be certain of what she saw.
His arms were twisted behind him as though they were tied to his belt at the back. And his head was lolling horribly on one side. There were holes, great dark sockets where the eyes should have been. And there were shreds of something hanging down from his mouth and cheeks. I felt sick and closed my eyes for a moment. When I dared to open them again, he was gone.
Dating from the early 1700s, Rose Cottage at Redoubt near Godshill looks exactly the sort of place most people would like to live in. When Peter and Anne Morton moved here with their daughters in 1976, they noticed a carving on the beam over the open fireplace. It depicts a man's large left hand and a date, Friday, the 22nd of March, 1771, along with a name, William Fleming. They treated the carving as a curiosity and delighted in showing it to visitors. Yet it proved to have much more significance than they realized at the time. And at the end of each week, they definitely weren't thankful it was Friday.
We've been here for about
18 years, and when we'd only been here quite a short time, my wife was very aware that particularly on a Friday, the house would become quite uncomfortable. Lights would flash on and off, taps would turn on when they hadn't been turned on, and she was very, very frightened because one day during this she saw the outline of a severed hand. When I came home from work, things returned to normal. So when you get a bad experience like that, you try to put it down, you try to forget it. But they would continue, not every Friday, but mostly on Fridays. The situation became worse and worse, and my wife was becoming very frightened of being at home, and we were starting to feel very uncomfortable in the house. And then one Friday morning, when she was preparing to come to work and putting her makeup on in the mirror, she looked in the mirror, and behind her she saw a hand which seemed to be approaching her. She was terrified, and she just screamed at it. She got to the end of her tether with the fear of whatever was disturbing the house, and she screamed at it and told it to get out. And with that, the atmosphere of the ghost just disappeared and has never returned, thank goodness.
Since then, Fridays haven't been a problem for the Mortons. Just occasionally, Peter and Anne notice a smell of aromatic tobacco coming from a corner of their lounge by the settee. Perhaps it's old William Fleming, enjoying a pipe at the end of a hard day. So, what exactly is a ghost? There must be almost as many views on that subject as there have been sightings. We asked a number of people we felt might have something to say on the matter. Astrologer Lynn Empson has helped present several phone-in programs on Isle of Wight radio on the subject of ghosts.
I think there's something there from another dimension. Some people are more sensitive than others in picking these things up. You know, some people say, I've never seen a ghost in my life. Maybe they never will. And other people, they go into a room, they go into a house, and they can immediately see or sense something. It isn't always this sort of white shadowy thing. I mean, it can sometimes be a feeling, a presence, I think would best describe a ghost. But what it is and where it comes from, who knows? Lots of theories on that one. Some people tend to think, and I agree with this a bit, if you're sitting down, you're talking about ghost stories or talking about things that are a bit unusual, I wonder if you can conjure something up in your own mind, if it's the projection of something that you're feeling. Maybe some people are good at that, projecting their own fears or their own phobias, or I don't know, if you ever walk down a road late at night and it's dark, you can almost believe that there's someone watching you. And if you walk down that road in the daylight, you don't take a blind bit of notice of it. So maybe we help ghosts along a bit. That's a theory I have, a personal theory. But there again, someone else will tell you something totally different, I expect.
Gay Baldwin, a journalist on the island, began collecting local ghost stories as a result of a deluge of letters which followed a short newspaper article.
I think that there's no one explanation for ghosts. I think that there are several different types of ghost, and several different types of apparitions themselves. I think that there are the historical ghosts, the ghosts that walk in the old manor houses, the castles, the sort of places you'd expect to see them. I think this is possibly something to do with the fabric of the building. There's a historical, a ghostly echo in the building, and there's this strong emotion trapped in the place itself. A lot of people do comment on how haunted the island does appear to be, especially compared to the rest of the country. There is a theory that this has to do with the ley lines which run under the earth, magnetic energy lifelines, and under the island they are particularly strong. I've done what I can so far to try and track some of these down, and I've managed to plot a few, and I'm trying to find out whether the lines in fact run under areas which do appear to be more haunted. where there are more stories at the moment, and there does seem to be a correlation there.
Myrtle Blaney considers herself a transfiguration medium within the spiritualist movement, though she emphasises that she does not necessarily speak for other spiritualists.
Well, I don't think of them as ghosts. They're disembodied spirits. We were spirit before we came here, and in transition, our spirit goes back to the etheric world. It isn't a ghost. You see, there are people that I love very much, and how lucky I am to see them. In my work as a transfiguration medium, I can let those people come through, and through me they can see them. So for ghosts, there is no such thing. They are the people, our loved ones that have gone before. And of course, when people die, this strong golden chain of love, which is, enables our loved ones to be near us and help us in our hour of need and troubles and guide us.
The Reverend Michael Council, a London vicar, explains the Church of England's point of view.
I don't believe that the God that Jesus talked about would ever punish anybody by making them stay on earth as a ghost. There's nothing in the Bible to make us believe that there are ghosts. On the other hand, we have to take people's experiences seriously, and if they tell us that they've seen a ghost, then there's something that we as Christians have to do about it. I'm sure there are such things as place memories. Sometimes when something very emotional has happened in a place, the resonance of that emotion somehow seems to be there in the very stones, and people become aware of it when they visit that place later. Sometimes people who think they've seen a ghost are very troubled themselves, and every bishop in the Church of England has an official exorcist whom they will send along if somebody asks for it to say prayers in a particular place with a particular person. As much as anything else, it may be healing the memories of that particular person.
While the Bible does not mention the existence of ghosts in the colloquial sense of the word, there are many references to both angelic and demonic beings. So could psychic phenomena be attributable to the activity of such spirits? We discovered there was an organisation which had been set up to address such questions.
I could use a lot of other words as well as the word ghosts, like apparitions, spectres, phantoms, poltergeist, German for knocking spirit. There are spirits, clean and unclean, as we read in the Bible, familiars, elementals, emanations, and demons. So there's a whole list of names which basically mean the same thing as the term we've just used, ghosts.
So how do ghosts manifest themselves?
Well, through noises, various noises, rappings, knockings, through small objects moving around, being displaced and not knowing how, through temperature changes. Often in rooms you walk into an area where it's very, very cold and yet the rest of the room is warm. Visual images, actually, of ghost-like figures, sometimes with their head missing, or of seemingly persons who were known to have lived in that area or place at some time. Voices, lights, things happening that are luminous, sort of balls of light and luminaires appearing, and there can be bodily touch and even sexual assault.
What sort of places would you expect to find a ghost?
They often appear where there's been a violent death, where there's been traumas on battle sites around the world, often experienced, suicides, seances where they're held, and where occultism generally is practiced. You know, Ouija board, levitation, tarot cards, a whole range of things, but that's where they can often appear. They're allied to that sort of activity.
So, can ghosts be harmful?
In a short answer, yes. They can cause or be a contributing factor to anxiety problems, phobias, mania, conversion hysteria, obsessions, multiple personality disorders, forced memory, schizophrenia, fears and epilepsy. in all situations, they actually lead us away from the truth of God. We are told over 100 times in the Bible, in very strong terms, very, very strong terms, by God, that we are not to try and contact or get in touch with invisible spirits. Whether we think they are spirits of the departed or even angels.
Although there are clearly different emphases placed on the subject by the various parts of the Christian Church, there seems to be a consensus that the Church offers both protection and guidance to people who have encountered or are curious about the supernatural. The Downs Road, overlooking the Arraton Valley, affords some of the best views on the island. Sandown and Shanklin nestle in the bay on one side, and Ryde perches on the coast on the other. What you may not notice is that this road also overlooks arguably the most haunted place on the island, Knighton Gorges. Andrew Yore takes up the story.
Once famed as the island's most beautiful manor house, Knighton Gorges near Newchurch was sadly demolished by its owner in the 1820s. His reasons for doing this are a matter of some controversy. Some favour the story of an embittered father destroying his eldest daughter's inheritance when she married against his wishes. Others believe that the place simply became too much for the old man, and having let it fall into disrepair, he simply demolished it altogether and sold off its contents. Knighton Gorges was no stranger to tragedy. In 1721, Sir Tristram Dillington, the then owner, lost his wife and all his children when they were struck down by fever. Grief-stricken, Sir Tristram killed himself. Some believed that he shot himself, some believed that he drowned himself in the pond close to the old house. Whichever method he chose, the implications would have been serious. The property of suicides would have been forfeit to the Crown, and a faithful butler, realising this, set Tristram's horse loose with a broken girth and spread the story of a riding accident. The manor remained therefore in the Dillington family, but it was shortly after Sir Tristram's suicide that local people began to avoid the vicinity of the old house after dark. All that remains here today of Knighton Gorges are the old gateposts and the exposed foundations of part of the old kitchen wall. The lake view which the house once commanded is also rather less attractive nowadays. Yet many people say they've seen the old house itself still standing on its old site, despite the fact that it's been gone for over 170 years. Roger Coleman was one of them.
At first I thought, am I seeing things? And I sort of blinked and looked again, and I could see the what looked like a wall with a window, and I looked closer and it seemed to come much brighter, and I couldn't see anything below the wall. I could just see a wall, and I could make out several windows, but one window in particular had got a light in it, and I could actually see people moving behind the window. It looked as if they were dancing. I was conscious of what was going on around me because people were saying, "Can you see anything? Can you see anything?" And I said, "Yes, I can see a house, I can see a window, I can see people moving." I couldn't actually see a roof or anything like that. I could just see a front wall and a side wall. But it was a most strange feeling, a very strange sensation.
Each New Year's Eve, surprising numbers of sceptics, believers and the just plain curious flock to Knighton Gorges in the hope of seeing something materialise. Ivor Davis, the owner of the site, isn't particularly pleased about this annual invasion of his land without his permission, but as the event has become something of a local tradition, he seems rather resigned to it. We joined the throng at the gates to see in 1995. An expectant hush fell over the watchers as midnight approached, in stark contrast to the somewhat boisterous atmosphere as people gathered. As midnight came, a number of people, including one of our own party, claimed that they saw the partial manifestation of a female figure, while others claimed that they saw parts of the old house materialise. But what just about everyone noticed was a peculiar musical droning sound, punctuated with what sounded like short cracks of thunder. It began at midnight, and for a couple of minutes it drifted across the site with remarkable clarity. It would be easy to put this down to the sound of fireworks and ship's horns in Portsmouth welcoming in the new year, and certainly that was part of what was heard. But there were also some very ethereal vocal overtones in this sound, which made this otherwise rational explanation somewhat less than sufficient on its own. A number of people we interviewed for this film appeared to be especially sensitive to supernatural phenomena, and so have more than one story to tell us. One such person was Judy Axford.
We were stood there by the gate, and all of a sudden this woman in mauve came at some speed towards that gate, floating. And as she was getting near, it got really cold, and I shot into the car, and my friend got half in there with her leg hanging out, and I was halfway up over the chute there, and before she had a chance to shut the door. And then I went up to the new church chute where the church is there, and I suppose we've been there about 10 minutes and been very, very quiet, and all of a sudden you hear the crack of a whip.
Some parts of Knighton Gorges do in fact live on physically. When Maurice Bissett had the house demolished in 1821, much of its structure was sold off as building material. It was from there that this elegant staircase came. It now graces Jill Salmon's house at Langbridge Farm, Newchurch, and the timbers and mouldings in other parts of the building may well also have originated from Knighton Gorges. It may be that ghosts are portable and follow familiar items if they're moved. Ivy Wellstead, sensitive to many supernatural phenomena, believes she has seen Maurice Bissett on the staircase at Langbridge.
I have seen the old boy pacing about in the hall at the bottom of the stairs. He had a moustache, dressed in black, and he looked furious. The story about the young lady is that he had found someone whom he wished her to marry. But she said no, which caused a feud between them. You are going to marry her, but apparently she had other ideas because she had another lover at the time. He told her he was giving a ball on New Year's Eve and he was going to announce her engagement to this man that he had chosen. Well, she dressed up and several people have seen the young lady in her beautiful ball gown. Tinted blue and mauve. It's difficult to explain what the colour is actually. And she has been seen floating down the driveway, or rather fleeing towards the gateway, where the pony and trap was waiting and her lover there to take them off into the night. Oh.
Unexpectedly, just as we completed filming at Langbridge, Ivy had a strange experience at the foot of the Knighton Gorges staircase. She suddenly felt very cold and complained of a sharp pain in her right arm.
The stairs, threatening everybody umpteen times like that. Oh, it'll go off in a minute. It's not the first time this has happened. I've been places. I can pick things up, you see, that's the trouble.
Knighton Gorges casts its spell over a wide area of the locality. A resident of Ryde saw something strange here one night in 1969. He was in his car with a girlfriend, looking out over Knighton Gorges from the Downs Road at the lights of Sandown Bay in the distance. Suddenly the whole area around Knighton Gorges lit up as bright as daylight for several seconds. Perhaps the old house was making one of its rare appearances. And David Baldwin was telling his coach passengers all about the mysteries of Knighton Gorges when they were treated to an unexpected sight.
As we stopped outside the main gate, we saw a strange green light in the trees nearabouts where we're standing at the moment. This green light seemed to be hovering in the trees, did not move, and everyone in the coach was very interested. The majority of them got out of the coach and in actual fact came into the grounds here and tried to find the light, but no one could. And the nearer we got to the light, it seemed to go away from us. Until this day, we have no reason to explain the light, and 50 people on my coach had a most mysterious evening out.
Throughout the 50s and 60s, coach driver Ted Perry always drove his mystery tour passengers past Knighton Gorges, ensuring that he stopped his coach to point out the stone creatures atop the old gateposts. In the early 1970s, Ted was dismayed to notice one day that the creatures had disappeared. He wrote to the local newspaper, inquiring as to their whereabouts and expressing his fears that vandals may have removed them. His letter caused quite a stir. Several other people also wrote in to say that they were sorry to hear of the creature's removal. As public interest in the matter heightened, Old photographs were discovered which showed that the creatures had been removed sometime before 1916. It was therefore quite impossible that Ted, his coach passengers, and the other people that wrote to the newspaper could have seen the creatures at the times they claimed. Cars left in the vicinity appear to suffer mysterious electrical failures. Like a number of other people, both Roger Coleman and David Baldwin have found this out for themselves.
When I got back into the car, got in, and the car wouldn't start. Now, I knew there was nothing wrong with the car because it had just been serviced. It had taken me backwards and forwards to work for weeks since the service. I got in there and just would not start, and it took several occasions to get it to turn over. Eventually it did, but I didn't think anything of it at the time, but afterwards someone else said, oh, the same thing happened to them. I began to wonder if there was something about Knighton.
I tried to start the car, but the battery was totally flat. There was no charge whatsoever in the battery, no lights, not a hint of anything. And I got up on New Year's Day expecting to have to find a garage to buy a new battery. But I went out to the car, turned the key, and it started first time. And since that day, I have not touched the battery of the car. It's been in perfect order. I've never had a bit of trouble since. But on that night, something at midnight drew all the electrical charge out of the battery here at Knighton Gorges.
More details on all the items we have covered, and many other strange tales, can be found in Gay Baldwin's series of books, Ghosts of the Isle of Wight, on which our film was based. Gay's books are available in all good bookshops on the island, but be warned, they may not make ideal bedtime reading if you're of a nervous disposition. During the time we were making this film, we had an unexpectedly high number of equipment failures and technical problems, especially at Knighton Gorges. We could find no adequate explanation for this. Of course, it could all be put down to coincidence. But then again, how can you ever tell for sure? Things are not always what they seem. I hope you sleep soundly tonight.